everyone. Welcome to another episode of History Now, the Future, the show where we take a sharp look at some of the most pressing issues of today using history as our guide and the future as our destination. My name is Cory Bradford, and today I have a really good friend of mine and a special guest on the show. He is the man behind Ideal Soup, which is a series of social media pages and an online community of more than 1.5 million people who are all curious about fun facts, bite-sized bits of history, and unique natural phenomenon. He has taken all of this information and turned it into a new book. His book is called How to Sound Smart at Parties, an Evening of Fun Facts and Curious Conversations. It sounds like a really cool book for if you're having some type of gathering, if you're into trivia. I can't wait to talk to him more about it. He's an educational content creator who has been to more than 50 countries. I haven't even been to all 50 states. He's been to 53 different countries, and he speaks 2 different languages, both poorly, I might add, but that's one more language than me, so I'll give him credit for that. We've been friends for a few years now, doing content here on social media, and I can't wait to talk to him more about all the stuff he's got going on. Michael McBride, thank you for joining. Welcome to the show, man.
Cory, what's up, man? Thank you for the exceptional introduction. Makes me sound much better than I actually am. It's so good to be able to finally have a talk on record, man. I've so enjoyed our relationship over the years and going back and forth, and I absolutely love your content. I think you're totally brilliant. So yeah, I'm super excited to chop it up on here.
Yeah, awesome, man. You know, I'm sure you watch Futurama. You just look like a guy who would watch Futurama. You remind me, you're not nearly as like nefarious as these guys, but you remind me of the brains on Futurama that were trying to compile all like a pendulum of all knowledge in the universe. Now they were trying to destroy the universe after they got all the knowledge. But you're not trying to do that. But you kind of remind me of that because like your videos, and we were just talking about this, go in so many different directions, and you have like I literally every time I see you come on my For You page, I never know what I'm going to get. I always know it's going to be interesting, but I never know what I'm going to get. What inspires you to just go into all these different directions and to be interested in so many different things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's just it kind of. I always say I kind of try to create content for an audience of one, right? The idea being like, if I find it interesting, there's probably at least one other person out there who also finds it interesting, and hopefully more. I think that we tend to put things into boxes too quickly in kind of our modern culture, right? And the lines between history, science, art, pop culture, we view them as these very hard lines, right? We have, college courses that cover one or the other. We have books that cover one or the other. I think those lines are very porous, right? And I actually think that like looking at things in a more interdisciplinary way, you actually tend to understand the world much more deeply. And that's a very fancy way of also just saying like, I just have vicious ADHD and I'm interested in a bunch of stuff as well. So like, I'm just a naturally very curious person. And when all my friends got tired of hearing me talk about it, I started making content. That's pretty much it.
So you've been to 53 different countries.
So that's a little outdated. Now I'm at, I think, 67. I think I'm at 67 now. Yeah. Or 65.
So
some mid-60s. Yeah.
You've lost count. That's how many different countries you've been to. Wow. So like, have you been to like every continent? I'm assuming you haven't been to Antarctica.
I have not been to Antarctica, and I've also not been to Australia. I've not been to Australia. I'd really love to go, but the flights are like,
they're insane.
It's just, if you're going to go to Australia, you got to do an Australia trip because you're flying 40 hours out there, right? And but I've been to every continent other than Australia. Yeah.
Wow. That's insane. So I'm gonna do a little game with you here because this is I'm always interested in people who travel a lot. My brother travels a lot. He goes back and forth to like Singapore, and like his wife's from Singapore, so he travels a lot. So I'm always very curious about that. So let's take Asia for example. I'm sure you've been to a lot of different countries in Asia. What was the most fun country that you visited in Asia? Like the place where you just had to be
Thailand. No hesitation.
Like no hesitation. You didn't even think about the question.
yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, Asia's an amazing country. I also haven't explored East Asia a ton. I haven't been to Japan. Yeah. I was only in China for 24 hours on a long layover.
Oh, okay.
But I've traveled Southeast Asia extensively, and I lived in South Asia and India for a while. I think Thailand is just an amazing culture. It's super unique. It's one of the only countries in Asia that was never colonized, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So, for a lot of strange historical reasons, both because it was actually managed very well through that period of colonization, had very strong leaders, and also because the English and French kind of want it as like a buffer state. I think that combined with just like Thai history and things like that has created a really beautiful culture there that I find just like to exist in. I lived in Chiang Mai for 3 months,
Hmm.
like 2 years ago,
Oh wow.
and that's just full stop one of my favorite cities I've ever lived in. Specifically, like northern Thailand and southern Thailand are very different
Yeah.
culturally, geographically, everything. And like northern Thai people are just like so nice. I think top three cuisine in the world, in my opinion. Like
Yeah.
Thai food is one of the
Yeah.
few foods I don't get tired of. No pun intended. Don't get tired. And yeah, it's amazing. I also really like Lao.
Hmm.
I spent like a week in Lao, and that was like beautiful, adventurous, interesting. Obviously, folks with a really challenging past, and people that
Yeah.
have very resilient people have been through a lot and overcome a lot. I feel the same way
Yeah.
about Cambodia.
Yeah. Same. For
Um,
sure.
yeah. So, but in terms of just fun, in terms of just like this is a lovely place to spend
Yeah.
time. Thailand is just, yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, yeah, I mean the temples there are
Yeah.
incredible. These huge histories, and yeah, just a very alive, colorful culture. It's also very like there's a lot of youth culture there in
Yeah.
terms of like young people are very hip, very cool, doing cool things. Um, I think some of that was because in Chiang Mai we lived near the university, so we're always just seeing just like cool, cool
Yeah.
ass Thai kids hanging out, drinking coffee. But I mean, yeah, Chiang Mai had the best coffee scene of any city I've ever been to in my entire life
Awesome.
by a mile. Like the best coffee scene, the best
Hmm.
like world class competitive coffee brewers. And I'm not a
Wow.
snob. I drink like Trader Joe's coffee every day. But yeah, I mean, I could just talk about Thailand forever. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
that I think most fun country I've been to in Asia.
That is awesome. So let's switch it up a little bit. If we were to go to Europe, what was the country that had the best cuisine that you visited in Europe?
Oh, okay. I'm gonna go with Turkey. I know that's like
Really?
half in, half
Well,
in, half out,
that's
right?
yeah, that's right
Yeah,
there on
yeah,
the
yeah. But
line. That's right there on the
I
line.
think we'll count it, right? I think we'll
Yeah,
count it, right?
we can
Half
count
in.
that. We can count
Yeah,
that.
Turkey. Like no question.
Really?
Yeah, French food's good, but we've had a lot. I think
Yeah.
Italy. This is like by far one of my most controversial opinions, and I think Italy is overrated for food. And I know that
That's
that
a
that
that's a
that
strong
could
one.
every time I've said that, people get very very mad at me. I also haven't traveled to like some of the more foodie places in
Yeah.
Italy. I also, when I
Yeah.
travel, I tend not to spend a ton of money because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't.
Mm.
All my travels have been self funded, right? I don't come from money in in any sense. I grew up, very very middle class or lower,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I've just kind of been fortunate enough to both have like life circumstances that let me
Mhm.
travel. Like I worked in London for 3 years. I worked in India. And when you have a job abroad and when you have like a home base, then
Yeah.
you can kind of offshoot from there very cheaply. So when I was living in
Yeah.
London, I could travel to Turkey for €100. I could travel to Spain for €50 with Ryanair and all that. So, but no, I think Italian. I think Italy is a little overrated for food, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that much, honestly. I feel kinda the same.
When I was in northern Italy, I was in the Dolomites,
Mhm.
which granted is a very unique cultural space. It's kind of
Yeah.
like German Italian fusion,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, yeah,
But
yeah.
I was up there. I did like a big hike up there, climbed Mount Marmolada, the highest mountain in the Dolomites,
Oh,
and I came back
nice.
down. I was exhausted. It was like a 20-mile day. All beat up. I'm dusty. We go into a restaurant. I see on the menu pizza Viennese. And I'm like, oh,
Oh,
this sounds lovely. It's like a
okay, yeah.
Austrian Italian fusion. Like,
Yeah.
sign me up. I ordered pizza Viennese. Pizza Viennese, Corey. Pizza Viennese is a pizza with sliced hot dogs on top.
Oh.
I'm like, what the fuck is
Then
this?
no
What
no.
the hell is this?
That's a
I'm like,
no.
no spices, no sauces, no. It is just sliced hot dog on a pizza. And I saw it a few other places up in the Dolomites too. Pizza Viennese, they
Really?
love it up there.
Oh, man.
But yeah, that's one of my most controversial opinions. Italy's a little
That's
overrated for food,
that's
but
disappointing.
Turkey is unbelievable for food. Another controversial opinion. I think the UK is actually underrated for food, not
Really?
because I mean, British food does have some interesting dishes that a lot of folks don't know
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Kind of like a lot of the fish pies, meat pies,
Yeah,
things like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But more so, just like the UK is so multicultural now that London's one of those
Mm.
cities where you can just get like any cuisine on the planet. And Spanish food is unbelievable as well. Spanish
Yeah.
food is just like, I mean, I could eat Spanish food all day long. Super
Yeah.
super diverse cuisine, crazy influences historically with like the Arabic influence.
Now, I'm interested, how many countries in South America have you visited?
So I visited almost all of South America. That's actually the place I've traveled most extensively. I lived in South and Central America for a year and a half. So I've been
Mhm.
to Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, obviously Central America, not South
Yeah.
America, Costa Rica, also Central America,
Yeah, yeah.
Brazil, briefly.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I love South America. It's my favorite part of the world. I love like South American, like Latin American culture broadly, if you can even call it that. Obviously,
Yeah.
every country and every region is so insanely diverse and
Yeah.
specific culturally there. But I'm like pretty much fluent in Spanish,
Oh,
which I
cool.
kind of developed while I was living down there.
Well, what's a country in South America that Americans would never think to go to, but you think that they should definitely go to because there's such a fun time to be had there?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't. Where do Americans think to go? I don't know. I mean, Colombia is probably my favorite country in the world to visit. On for so many reasons. I spent like 6 months there, and I love Colombian culture so deeply. They are some of the warmest, most welcoming people I've ever been around. They're not just friendly; they're like, come to my house. Let's hang. I was, here's a story I tell, right? I was in Colombia, right? And the our apartment building had like someone who did some of the cleaning, right?
Yep.
I strike up a conversation with her, and she is like telling me about where she's from, and I'm saying, oh, I'm going to visit all these places. She's like, oh, my village is really beautiful, right? My like pueblo is really beautiful. It's really lovely, right? And right outside of town. I'm like, oh, that's great. Where this all in Spanish, obviously. She's like, oh, it's like 4 hours from here, and she's like, what are you doing next weekend? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, I'll drive you. I'll drive you to my hometown and show you around. I'm like, no, that's ridiculous. Like, that's a crazy thing to offer a stranger. But
Yeah.
I mean, there's just this like really deep sense of community there. There's
Yeah.
a really deep sense of like family bonds, neighborhood bonds. Yeah, I don't know. I just love it. Just it's such warm people. The nature there is spectacular. It's like the second most biodiverse country in the world. You have
Yeah.
rainforests, you have mountains, you have beaches. The food is very good. The coffee is obviously great.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Although funny enough, that's only been a recent phenomenon. Up until recently, a lot of the coffee in Colombia was actually very bad because they were forced to export. Not forced, but just due to capitalistic pressures, all the good quality coffee was exported. And so even though they were growing some of the best coffee in the world, the locals who lived, an hour away from these coffee farms actually sometimes didn't even have access to this coffee. And the stuff in the grocery stores there would be much lower tier than what, we have in the United States, which is really sad. And you see this in a lot of countries where, their cash crop actually ends up getting exported and the local stuff is actually worse. That's turned around now. Like Colombia has a really thriving coffee culture there now. But
That's awesome.
yeah, obviously, very challenging, both recent and far history in Colombia. But yeah, I love Colombia. And then in terms of where Americans wouldn't think to visit, I think Colombia is kind of getting people's radar.
Yeah, I would think so.
Like Medellin is one of my favorite cities in the world.
Mhm.
I think Argentina. I don't know. Like I think Americans do visit Argentina a lot, but like Buenos Aires and like
Yeah.
Argentina in general, Patagonia, is a really different kind of place than what I expected. Like Argentinian culture is so different than the rest of South America. You go further down south, and it's like very much cowboy culture.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, it's like it's very crazy. They call them gauchos. Yeah, gauchos.
Yeah.
And it's like an Argentinian cowboy, and it's leather chaps and big knives, and like while it surely has like an Argentinian flair to it,
Yeah.
the culture is in a sense very recognizable to someone from like West Texas. Like there's a lot of grilling meat, there's a lot of riding horses. It's like it's very very interesting. It's very interesting.
That's super interesting. Now, I'm assuming you've been to Africa a few times. What are some of the countries you've explored there?
So Africa is actually like a big spot on my travel history that is a little bit unfilled. I've only been to Morocco. I did like a road trip through Morocco.
Morocco. Okay. Cool.
But that's the only place I've been in Africa. I haven't touched the rest of it. And so that's probably my next kind of priority for travel is doing some kind of like I mean, Africa's such a massive continent.
It's a lot.
It would take. You'd either have to do it like you'd either have to do it like in South America where you just go live there for like a year and a half, or really just like pick up a chunk of it for a big road trip or something. But the two I would say my three like must visit places next are pick a region of Africa to check out. Central Asia, like the stands, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. I'm super keen on visiting.
Yeah.
And then Japan. I've never been to Japan, and like that's also I'm in Seattle. Japan's like so close,
right?
But like I just obviously, I mean, Japan's Japan, right?
I
like anime. I like it's like I like Japanese food. Like I just feel like Tokyo would be such a crazy, intense and beautiful experience.
And it's crazy you've been to over 60 countries and you haven't been to Japan yet.
I know, right? Yeah, totally. It's very funny. It's a big blind spot that certainly a lot of people have been to. But Morocco was great. I like Morocco a lot. We did a road trip
Yeah.
into the Sahara Desert, which was crazy.
Oh, cool.
And then we like rode camels into the desert. I actually couch
Nice.
surfed in the Sahara Desert, which is crazy.
Really?
So couchsurfing is essentially like Airbnb, but it's free. It's like a cultural exchange program, right? And you basically just send people requests to stay with them. You stay with them for free. Sometimes you get a pad on the floor. I stayed on the floor of someone's dorm room in Finland, for example.
Oh,
Sometimes
wow.
it's like in France, in the Alps, I stayed with a wealthy older couple who had 2 extra rooms. It was me and a friend. We each had our own room. They had bikes for us. They cooked us breakfast. It was this like massive chateau, right? So I'm one of the biggest couchsurfing fans in the world. This is also one of the ways I've managed to go to 67 countries. Is in a lot of these countries I wasn't paying for lodging because I was using couch surfing or working or doing other stuff. But anyways, I was like, I randomly had the idea to try couch surfing in the Sahara Desert, and this guy who was like a Berber nomad had his like hosted couch surfers in his like desert tent. It was a crazy experience and this amazing example of like how global our world has become. Where this guy is like a little satellite internet dish in the corner, and he's like loving hosting couch surfers. It was really cool. Yeah, it was really cool.
That sounds awesome. And it also sounds like an awesome and cheap way to be able to just like experience so many different cultures in so many different parts of the world.
No, totally. It's like I think is travel expensive and is a privilege to travel? Of course, it's a privilege because of the passport you own. It's a privilege
Yeah.
to be healthy and have a body that can move, right? And of course, it does cost money, right? But
Sure.
it can cost a lot less than most people think, and that is basically inversely correlated to how much discomfort you're willing to tolerate. And if you have a really high discomfort tolerance, you can sometimes travel pretty cheaply, especially once you get past the initial like plane ticket over there.
Yeah.
Um, Even in really expensive countries, you can make lodging and food work for like sometimes, 10, $20 a day if you really stretch it out and eat nothing but, grocery store food and couch surf and walk everywhere. So yeah.
Awesome. So I'm curious about your approach to research because again, as we talked about earlier, your videos, you do fun facts, you do history facts, you go in so many different directions. And I'm just, I know when I do my history videos, there's a ton of research involved. Sometimes it takes me like I don't release as many videos as I should, just because it takes me so long to research one of my videos. And your videos are just compiling a ton of facts in a very short amount of time. So how do you go about researching some of these subjects?
That's a great question. I think that it varies depending on the topic and even the length of the video. Like the longer a video is, the more research you need, and that is not a
Sure.
linear relationship. That can actually be a little bit exponential, right? So for a ten
Yeah.
minute a 10-minute video takes much more than 10 times the research of a 1 minute video, and that's because in a 1 minute video there might be some one part of this topic might have a debate between scholars, for example.
Yeah.
And in a 1 minute video, you can kind of just brush over that part of the topic or even just ignore it completely in some cases because it's not relevant to the shorter, more condensed version. In 10 minutes, not only do you need to tackle that piece of the topic, you need to have an opinion on like which scholar is right on this, right? So,
There you
okay,
go.
well, 60% of scientists think that, this dinosaur ran and put its tail out horizontal, but 40% think that it didn't have the ability to run because its bones were too thin or whatever. What's your opinion? And so you can either just lay it out and give like a landscape of the research, or you can give a perspective on it.
Mhm.
But in general, my research process, I would just kind of start with Google, right? I just kind of start with Google. I start by reading very high level stuff, and then I tend to just like drill down, click in. I try to look at a lot of if I can get to a scientific paper as fast as
Yeah.
possible. That's
Yeah.
always kind of the goal, is to get to
Yeah.
primary sources or scientific
Sure.
papers.
Sure.
I also find like honestly things like Reddit Ask Historians is sometimes a
Yeah.
very good resource to jump off of. You can't end there. You can't trust it.
No,
You
you
have to
can't
double
trust
check
it.
everything
Yeah.
they say, of course. But sometimes responses like that will pull together info from disparate sources
Mhm.
much better than even like Wikipedia, for example, which is
Yeah.
also honestly, I think for 99% of people, Wikipedia is a great jumping off point. And
Oh, yeah, sure.
these days, I know this is crazy to say and I'll probably catch flack for it, but when we were in high school or whatever, it was always like, oh, don't use Wikipedia, it's not trustworthy.
Yeah.
These days, I think very frequently Wikipedia is much more trustworthy than even like reputable publications. The Smithsonian. Not to hand the Smithsonian. I love you guys. You guys do great work. But like the Smithsonian's articles on their website, you think, oh, the Smithsonian, this is a prestigious institution. Every word on this is going to be fact checked and amazing.
Mhm.
There's been multiple times now where I've found an article on the Smithsonian, gone to make a video on it. I'm like, this is a super interesting topic. And then as I went deeper into it, I realized, oh, this is either not true or just kind of true, or they're
Yeah.
sensationalizing it too much.
Yeah.
And I find Wikipedia tends to do a very good job at exactly what I just said before. This kind of, well, 60% of scientists think this, 40% think this. Wikipedia tends to lay out that landscape much better than
Yeah.
even quote unquote more prestigious sources, which will often just pick the most interesting perspective and just talk about the most interesting
Yeah.
perspective and not offer these counterpoints. So shout out Wikipedia. It's one of the only good places left on the internet. Like the entire internet has been shitified and
Oh my gosh.
corporatized, and every
Yes.
website's getting
Yes.
worse. It's happening to Reddit right now. Like I feel it,
Yeah, that
like
sucks, doesn't it? Yeah.
everyone started adding plus Reddit to their searches, and
Mhm.
people have caught on. And now Reddit is full of AI junk. It's full of
Yeah.
marketing stuff. It's becoming more integrated with search engines. Like 3 years from now, Reddit will be as useless for finding information as any other site on the
Yeah.
planet is now. But
Unfortunately.
Wikipedia is one of the few websites that has like resisted that pull to just get shittier and shittier. It's actually the opposite. I think year over year, Wikipedia gets better and better
Yeah.
and better and
Yeah.
more accurate and more. And that's mostly just due to like the community of folks working very, very hard
Mhm.
on it, right?
Mhm. It's crazy that you said this because I've had the same when I research my history videos, my starting points, like you said, Google and Wikipedia is where I start from. And then I take the things I see there and I cross-reference them with more scholarly sources just to make sure they're true. But I've definitely noticed that some of these, especially, think about stuff like the Smithsonian, which of course, I'm a fan of as well. But you gotta think that there's some political stuff kind of goes into that because it is a public institution, and maybe certain people that get certain leverage over certain things kind of can twist the story into certain narratives for you know political reasons, patriotic reasons, things like that. And like you said, Wikipedia does an incredible job at giving all angles to a particular story, a particular event, and you can just go down those rabbit holes on other sources to like read papers and do things like that. See the actual source they got it from, the book. I've been using Wikipedia to like get new book recommendations, and things like that.
I would even go so far as to say occasionally, I
Mhm.
think Wikipedia is, and I'm couching this, don't, someone's going to clip this and make me sound really stupid. I think occasionally, in very rare instances, sometimes Wikipedia is actually better than singular scholarly sources because, again, sometimes scholarly sources will have a very distinct perspective.
Sure,
And
sure.
like I said, if it let's say there's a topic where 80% of scientists or historians think one thing and 20%
Mhm.
think the other, and you pull up one scholarly article and it's from that 20%, you might think that's the consensus.
Yeah.
And if you just do that, obviously there's meta-analyses, which are scholarly sources that are way better than Wikipedia and cover
Yeah,
the breadth of
yeah,
things, of
yeah,
course,
of
right?
course.
But in terms of saying, hey, what are the competing viewpoints on this and how do we drill into it? I think Wikipedia is, genuinely speaking, only beaten out by, yeah, meta-analyses, right?
Mhm.
And certain like books, things like that, that again cover the broad range of perspectives. And I honestly think, and I'm curious what you think about this, I think that with a lot of these videos, I think one of the most challenging intellectual tasks is actually finding out what is consensus on this topic among historians.
Yes,
What is
yes.
consensus among scientists, if it even exists, right?
Mhm.
And on
Right.
most topics, it does exist, right? Like I think most topics tend to fall in distribution of kind of like 80% of folks think one thing,
Mhm.
10% of folks think, like 80% of folks think one thing, that's consensus. 15% of folks believe in alternate but plausible hypotheses,
Sure,
and then
sure.
5% of folks are crackpots who
Yeah, yeah,
have very little evidence for their perspectives,
yeah,
um but sometimes it's hard to figure out which one's which unless you're really deep into a field. And
yeah.
so yeah, I really think that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, with my history videos, that is one of the biggest challenges because you're dealing with different perspectives and you're also dealing with different perspectives about sensitive issues. And
Oh
so
yeah.
for me, it's always like I obviously it's a lot of it's comedy based, so I do these jokes, but within these jokes, there's this revelation of like it's just actually kind of messed up. And yeah, I'm doing
Yeah.
this joke about it, but within that joke, I'm trying to kind of get you to see that this terrible thing was done to this, Native American tribe, or this terrible thing was done during this, political era of slavery or something like that. And within the joke, I'm trying. And sometimes it's weird for me too because like sometimes people, kind of like anything else, any other bit of satire, a bit of media that does that. Sometimes it gets lost. The jokes gets lost, and people start thinking like, oh, he really thinks like that, and they're not getting that. Oh no, I'm trying to make a bigger point through the satire. And sometimes people will come on my page and they'll take a joke and they'll just like, oh my god, it was so funny when you said this like really racist type thing. And it's like, no, I was making fun of that person and I was trying to illustrate how wrong they were. but you got so lost in the joke, you didn't really get that. And so it makes it where I have like a lot of kind of weird followers that I think follow me for the wrong reasons sometimes. And I think that's one of the things that you have to be careful about with history is you get people that follow you because they have a certain agenda and they want to
Yeah.
use history to push that agenda. And you always got to be very wary of that.
No, I truly couldn't agree more. And I want to dive into this more. I think first off, I think I think some of your satire and your jokes are first off some of the best out there, and also I think you do an amazing job of really signaling deeper truths through satire that you don't get through a straight retelling of history. I think one
Sure.
thing you do very well is um, really capture the attitudes of a lot of these eras, where a lot of these kind of atrocities or injustices that are committed in the past, people
Mhm.
doing it are genuinely very casual about it. They're very lackadaisical about it. They
Yeah.
enjoy it at times, right?
Yeah.
Look at the freaking postcards of lynchings with crowds of folks
Yeah.
smiling and
Insane.
eating
Mhm.
corn on the cob and having a
Mhm.
great time, right? Like,
Mhm.
and I think that your like satire of obviously a ton of different stuff, but just drilling down into these kind of like injustice type things, like you mentioned, these kind of like, oh, he's saying racist stuff. It's so crazy how to me it's like that really does reveal this deeper truth that you don't get from a textbook of like, my god, they really were casual about this really
Yeah.
was a lot of the
Yeah.
attitudes of the day.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to me though that with that kind of stuff you are going to catch flack from both sides of the kind of political aisle.
Oh,
Folks,
sure.
on one side folks will say, how can you say that, like not understanding like it's a character.
Yeah.
It's like I hate when folks like do a quote and say like John Steinbeck. It's like, no, a character in a John
In a
Steinbeck
book.
novel said that. He didn't say that, right? That's very different.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Very different.
That's
Very
yeah,
different.
that is very different, you know? Yeah, it's like, the person who wrote the show Hannibal or whatever. It's like putting
Yeah.
a quote from a serial killer in their mouth or Dexter or whatever. It's like, you can't do
Yeah.
that. CSI, right?
Right?
And
Yeah.
on the flip side, like you said, a lot of folks are kind of, you worry folks are sometimes like laughing at the wrong moment or falling into the
Sure.
wrong reasons.
Sure.
I'm not sure if this is apocryphal. It might be apocryphal, but I once read a story, again, might be totally apocryphal. And that's one of the big reasons why Dave Chappelle shut down his show originally.
No,
Because
yes.
he's like the wrong people are laughing at the wrong moment. And
No,
like
that's
like
actually very true. And right when
yeah.
you said that, I was literally thinking that in my head. I was gonna mention it, but then, like you already went there. Yeah, apparently when he was making the third season, he was, because a lot of his jokes deal with like he's doing jokes about civil rights, he's doing jokes about slavery, and he's trying to reveal these greater truths, but through a very kind of wild form of comedy. And I think apparently he was doing a bit like that, and someone on the set just started like laughing, and just like the way the person laughed and the way they were repeating the jokes just kind of made him feel some type of way of like, I don't know if this is the right thing because people are taking this out of context and they're not getting what I want them to get from it. They're just laughing at, oh, it gives me license to say this and license to say that. And so yeah, apparently that was one of the big reasons why he left that show, which is a crazy opportunity. He was making like tens of millions of dollars doing that. It was
Yeah.
one of the most popular things out at the time. And yeah, and sometimes I do like I'll see comments and I'm like no, that's not what I wanted you to get from this. And it's like you can't really control when you're doing, especially when you're doing comedy, you can't really control what people get from it. All you can
Yeah.
do is try your best to put that through line in there and put that insight in there, and hopefully they pick up on it. And most people do. Most of my followers get what I'm trying to do and they understand the satire. Every once in a while you'll get that 10% that just sees it on their For You page and they laugh at the wrong reasons or laughing for the wrong reasons. But when you're doing it the way I'm doing it, you kind of, I've kind of committed to a certain style. And even sometimes I'm looking at some of my videos and I'm like, I can't believe I actually said that. But I've committed to a certain style. And it's like, I have to go with that now. And I just have to
Yeah.
use it for the best purposes that I possibly can.
I love it though. I think again, I think you do such a good job. I'm like, I'm your number one fan, seriously, and have been forever. I think it's also just like I think it's obviously like we live in a time that just had like seen a complete and utter demolition of nuance, right?
Sure.
And
Sure.
trying to inject
100%.
nuance into a lot of these topics is, I think, incredibly important. But you do run into these like bizarre landmines of,
Yeah.
oh my god, I don't like who's agreeing with me, or oh, you're agreeing with me, but then taking it way too far.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that tends to lead to these very black and white in group out group type uh, 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 pieces of content that I don't think are good for us, right? Like,
Sure.
I
Sure.
don't think that this is the Middle Ages and everything needs to be a morality play. And if there's not a
Yeah.
clear moral lesson at the end of it that you can articulate in two sentences, it's somehow bad or wrong
Yeah.
or whatever. I really think that's one of the big mistakes that the kind of modern content environment has made, and it's become kind of toxic in that sense, is
Yeah.
this desperate need for these very clear one sentence takeaways from every single movie, every piece of content, every book. And
Yeah.
it's like, life is messy. I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
one of the first things we realize studying history is like,
Oh yeah.
history is
100%.
messy, man.
Super
It's
messy.
messy. Things don't cut across clear lines morally, ethically, practically. Like there are just no clear lines in history. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think
And
it's
people don't seem to understand it. And your videos, and there are some instances where you do a video that, I see people in the comments and they're trying to get some sort of moral takeaway, but the conversation is way too complex to just get one thing from it. For instance, you did a video recently about a proposal for how we could solve the problem of
yeah,
having
yeah,
nuclear
yeah.
codes.
Wait, yeah. Wait, yeah. Let's get into this. This is a really interesting
This
one
is a
for a lot of
really interesting
reasons.
way. So you did a video about, and people actually, and I think some people kind of misunderstood that you were just, this was someone had this as a proposal. It wasn't a thing that we were actually
Right. Okay.
doing.
So
So
yeah.
you go into it and
Okay.
you
So
explain it.
so yeah, let's give the audience a little bit of background. So it's something called the Fisher Protocol,
Mhm.
which Fisher was an academic, and he proposed this interesting idea, which is, hey, how do we stop the president? The president has sole discretion for launching nuclear weapons. Now, there's
Mhm.
actually a whole interesting historical reason why we ended up here, because we invented nuclear weapons, and at first it was like, who should control this, right? Oh, it should be the Air Force, because it's planes that drop it. No, it should be the Army, because it's part of this broader thing, right? And you know, when you think about it, there's no other like physical weapon that the president controls, right? He gives
No.
commands to the army, and the army executes.
Yeah.
But basically, in the Cold War, this idea of, hey, we're only going to have 5 minutes to respond once we realize, Moscow sent over a nuclear weapon, basically slowly led to, hey, the president should have sole discretion to launch nuclear weapons. Now, interestingly, there's a whole theory that a lot of the kind of increase in executive power in America kind of
Mhm.
started there.
Yeah.
And that was
I
like
can see
a
that.
real strong turning point for the president, not just being like a one part of our complex system of checks and balances, but really like the clear leader of America with much clearer power bases. Anyways,
Sure.
I won't get too far into that. So the idea is, okay, how do we prevent the president from like waking up, having a bad day, and nuking Russia or wherever, right?
Mhm.
And the Fisher Protocol is a really interesting idea, which is the nuclear codes should be implanted inside the body of someone close to the president. Their entire job should just be to stand by the president. And if he wants to launch a nuclear weapon, to get those codes, the president needs to kill that person with their bare hands. Choke him out, cut him open, pull out the codes, and then he can launch a nuclear weapon. The idea being, right, it will drive home the gravity of what he or she is about to do, right? If you are going to launch a nuclear weapon and take millions of lives, first, you should take just
Take
one
one.
life, but very, very viscerally, so you understand what you're about to do. Anyways, super fascinating idea. I loved it, right? But the comment section was fascinating, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, first off, as you mentioned, I thought one of the craziest things was a lot of people thought that I was saying this is
This is actual
what we
protocol.
currently do.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people are like, I can't believe we do this. I'm like, no. And like, I again, it's like this kind of thing where like, do we have to spell everything out for everyone, or risk being
Yeah.
interpreted in the worst possible way? Like, the language I used was, this is one of the craziest ideas to come out of academia. And I
Exactly.
thought that implied, hey, this is just a crackpot idea out of
Mhm.
academia. I didn't
Mhm.
say this is the current
What we
protocol,
do.
right?
Yeah.
But a lot of folks interpret that way, which blew my mind, especially considering it's so ridiculous, which, maybe also speaks like the ridiculousness of the current state of
Of our
government
era.
and
Yeah.
affairs that we believe that could be possible, right? How crazy
Yeah.
our current era is.
The comments were insane, and like you said, we were talking about trying to get these sort of moral conclusions from every single subject, and that's one of those subjects where there's so much nuance there, because like, what if we are under attack, and what if this is something that needs to be done, but this president has to do this thing to get it, and what if they're incapable of doing so, right? So there's like this argument that, well, that kind of step would be a bit too much, but then there's this other argument against, if you're a tyrant and you just want to you want to be the first to launch a nuclear attack, this is something that would prevent you, especially when you consider the fact that person standing next to them is probably not going to be someone that they hate. It's probably not going to be someone that they have a problem with. This is a person that's like technically on their team that they now
Yeah,
have to kill in
totally.
order to be able to launch this attack. So I thought it was just an interesting question that gets the mind thinking, and there doesn't necessarily need to be a 100% it's this, it's that. Like
Exactly. And
we can just think about the nuances there and have a conversation and look at all the different perspectives and all the different scenarios and outcomes and contingencies with that, instead of having to be like, well, it's either this or that. It's either it's a great idea or it's a bad idea. You see what I'm saying?
1,000%. And I feel like it's so bizarre, this like instinctual urge that everyone has now to categorize everything into good or bad. So I say this
Yeah.
idea, and it can't just be interesting or thought
Hmm.
provoking. It has to be, is that good or bad? Is that morally good or morally bad? Right? Like I call it like the marvelization of America. It's like I feel like
Yes.
I feel like it's like
Yes.
we want everything to be a Marvel movie, right?
Yeah.
Where the good
Yeah.
guys are dressed up in American flags and Captain America shields, and the bad
Hmm.
guys are, evil aliens. And like we want everything to be these very clear black and white, good and bad stories.
Yeah.
And almost nothing in
No.
politics, history, or just our world in general is like that. Um, Although I think my favorite comment from that video was like several folks were like, "That is the perfect job for me. Like, I sign me up, like sign me up. Government benefits. I get to stand around all day,
Uh,
and you might kill me. Perfect."
it's it'd be so funny, like you're that person and you're just standing there, and then you're in the war room, they're talking about something, and you're just kind of looking around like, well, I gotta go, guys. You just try
Yeah,
to like run away.
yeah.
Like, they're chasing
Gotta go
them.
use the bathroom. Gotta go use the bathroom. Sorry.
Yeah, he's a bathroom. It's like, don't let him get away. But that make for a very interesting movie idea. Or just a part of a movie. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, be
Um,
good. Be good Black Mirror episode or something,
Yeah,
right?
right, right. Oh, that would be an excellent Black Mirror episode. And I was just thinking about what you said about the marvelization of America and just culture in general. See, this is the reason why I'm more of a DC comic book fan, because
Right.
there's more gray in
Yeah,
like stuff like
totally.
Batman and stuff like that. There's more like there's some of these motivations are a little different, and you can kind of see not everything is so black and white, not everything is so like good versus evil. Sometimes there's a middle area there, and I think that's more like real life.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean,
100%.
I mean, that's all another. I mean, Marvel movies like they are propaganda, right? Like
Oh,
on
100%.
some level, it's like they work
100%.
very closely with the U.S. government.
Oh yeah, 100%.
The U.S. government has a whole program where like it's basically like, hey, I'm not sure if folks in the audience are aware of this. A lot of them probably will be, but
Yeah.
it's like, hey, if you want access, let's say you want to film something with like tanks and jeeps and this and
Hmm.
that. Well, that's unbelievably expensive to
Oh
create on
yeah.
your own.
Oh
So
yeah.
the U.S. government, and I hope I'm getting all these facts right, but I'm pretty sure I am,
Hmm.
says, hey, if you want to use these for your films, that's totally fine. We have a whole program where you can rent them. It's not expensive, yada yada. We just gotta
But
double check. We just gotta double check the film and make sure that it's not misrepresenting the glorious American military.
oh yeah.
And so that's how a lot of these Marvel movies and big action movies kind of end up being like arms of propaganda, more or less.
Yeah, I mean the Top Gun Maverick movie. I mean, was basically the script was almost co-written by by the
So
United
good
States
though.
military.
So good though. So
Yeah.
good.
Oh, it's a great
Oh,
movie. Don't get me
dude,
wrong.
sweet,
It's a
sweet
great
propaganda.
movie.
Inject it into my veins. I soaked it up. It worked on me. I was like, hell yeah, by the end of that movie.
Well, you know
It
what's
was
so
so well
crazy?
done.
It did, and I mean that was the purpose. I feel like they probably got recruits for like the Air Force and like
Probably.
Space Force and
Yeah.
everything, but with that movie,
No, totally.
100%. It definitely did its job. But yeah, no, great movie. One of the better movies of the last like 3 or 4
It's so funny.
years.
It's like I feel like there's movies that are so clearly like produced in a lab to be a blockbuster,
Oh yeah.
and that's obviously one of them.
Oh,
But
100%.
sometimes you can kind of see the stitch lines, you can see the executive meetings that are happening or
Yeah.
whatever. Top Gun Maverick was like so good. I like looked past all of that. I was like, God, this is just like it's like watching a gymnast on a balance beam. It's like it was so technically proficient at being a blockbuster film, I couldn't help but enjoy it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you real quick. What are some of your, because you go into so many different directions. Like I wrote down here, sometimes you do stuff about nature, sometimes you do stuff about tech. I love your
yeah,
video about where the remote control came from and why we call it a clicker, even though it
yeah,
doesn't click
yeah,
anymore. Like I love
yeah,
that because my grandparents had one of those old clickers, like on one
yeah.
of those big TVs, and like nobody knows about that anymore. And so I love that
Which,
video.
which for the audience, in case you're curious, it is because old school clickers used hypersonic, yeah,
Yeah.
hypersonic sound to change the TV channel. So the click was a physical click, and your TV
Yeah.
picked up on that sound. Just don't
Yeah,
want to leave anyone hanging.
before they used infrared. Yeah,
Yeah,
really cool stuff. And and then you do stuff about like society and certain
yeah.
political issues and things like that. So, what is your favorite, if you do have one? What is your favorite type of video to do? If all those different genres, all those different kind of styles you do, what is one of your favorite types to do?
That's a great question. I think. My favorite type to do, I really do enjoy kind of the more society, cultural kind of pieces, because it's my voice, it's my perspectives, and
Yeah.
I sometimes feel like I'm kind of offering original thought versus
Yeah.
just teaching. I like to think, at least. I mean, nothing's really original, but um, I'd say what I'm most interested in is probably history content.
Yeah.
Like in my free time, I consume a ton of history content.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with history. I love science. I really do.
Yeah.
I do read science books. I'm currently reading a book about paleontology. That's like unbelievable. And
Oh,
basically,
cool.
how do we know what we know about dinosaurs? It's great,
Mhm.
right? And but like I started as a history nerd. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's my like I that those are the Patreons I pay for are history podcasts. You know what I'm saying? Right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's something I really love. But I find making history content is sometimes um challenging because you really have to dot your I's and cross your T's.
Sure.
And it can be
Sure.
really hard when you're telling a story to really understand all the different angles and this and that. And I find history fans are also less tolerant than science
Oh,
fans, funny enough. Like
yes.
I
100%.
find history fans are much more political, right? And
Yeah.
much more easily angered on both sides of the
Oh,
aisle.
yeah.
They
100%.
are real sticklers for details,
Oh,
and you
yeah.
get the smallest thing wrong, they will rip you apart.
Yes.
Whereas science content, I think, is just a friendlier space generally, right?
Yeah.
The audience that comes there is a little more excited and friendly. And sure, if you get something wrong, they'll correct you, right?
Yeah.
As they should. I mean, it's one I
Sure.
love getting corrected because it means
Sure.
I get to learn, right?
Sure.
I can take the video down and do a better one or whatever. But it's just a little friendlier. Obviously, like I think some of that's changing. There's the broad anti-science backlash. If you end up on that part of the internet, you can
Yeah.
get some. But it's like
Unfortunately.
I honestly like I don't care about criticism from those people. Like it doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
But when like some history nerd is like, oh, you really thought the Austro-Hungarian Empire was the most powerful in 1823? Really? Well, they actually didn't have their prime until the 1840s. It it kind of hurts me. I'm like, when I know they're right, when I'm like, oh
Yeah.
God, they got me.
I think it's interesting that you said, and actually, before you even said this, I actually kind of thought this. I thought it was interesting that you said that you kind of like doing the social political stuff sometimes even more so than some of the more things that are kind of more straightforward, because it gives you a chance to kind of put your opinions out there, put your perspective, your voice on things. And I think I noticed that I one of your most recent videos I just saw was about uh the distance that children were able to travel from their homes
Yeah.
in
Oh yeah, I made that
certain
one last night.
eras.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I literally just saw it this morning, and it really sparked a lot of thought in me, because I was thinking about, like, I grew up in the 90s, early 2000s, and I used to be able to go outside and travel my neighborhood a good bit in a time period, like you said, that was the crime was higher, like at that time, like
Yeah.
80s, early
Right.
90s,
Right.
way
Right.
higher. I try to tell
Way
people that
higher.
all the time, because when I was living in New York in the early 2020s, and some of my relatives down south where I was like, it's such a dangerous city. It's so unsafe. But I was like, no, 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 no. 80s New York City was a dangerous city that was very
Yeah.
unsafe. Like they were having like 1,000 no, sometimes like 2,000 or some insane amount of murders a year, like insane numbers. They're not even like a quarter of that now. Like it's not even close. I mean, yeah, there's still problems, and obviously there's areas to avoid, but it's not even close. And it is interesting that you in that video you showed that crime has actually gone down, and yet we're
Dramatically.
dramatically, right, from like the
Yeah.
high points of the late 80s, early 90s, and yet we are way more cautious, and a lot of their parents don't allow their children to go out as much. What do you think that accounts for? Because I know in the video you talked about maybe it's media and sensationalization of certain stories, but what do you really think? Why do you think that is, that parents are just so much more cautious about that sort of thing?
I think that plays into a broader topic, which is why is our perspective of American history so disparate from the reality at times,
Sure.
right? Like why do we feel this? It is a real sense today of we had a glorious past and we are currently in decay. Now, granted, this is a perspective that has occurred at all points in time
Sure.
through history.
Sure.
During the peak, like boyfriend obsessed with the Roman Empire trend on TikTok, I made a video that was like the Roman Empire was obsessed with the Roman Empire, and
Yeah.
every 100 years of the Roman Empire, all they talked about was we used to be better, we used to be stronger, we used to be moral, and then 100 years later, they're like we used to be moral, we used to be strong. Like it's this constant looking back of this
Yeah.
mythological glorious past. I think we're really obsessed with that here in America.
Oh yeah.
And I think that it's actually gotten much worse in the last like 5 to 10 years. And
Yeah.
there's like there's bigger topics around this, things like the Greatest Generation, for example, where
Mhm.
we have a lot of myth. There was a tremendous amount of draft dodgers in World War I and World War II. When
Oh yeah.
America entered World War II, the average American, if you were just ask the average person, hey, is the average American more fit today or in 1920? They would say, oh, 1920, we were in the farms eating good food and healthy and no bad stuff. Like it was a critical problem for America where we could not find enough fit, healthy troops. Like one of the big reasons for a lot of the social programs and school lunches and exercise programs and things like that is because in World War I, America could not draft enough fit, strong, healthy troops. People were showing up, emaciated with 50 cavities and vertebrae issues and scoliosis and rickets, and like these people were not fit to serve, right? And so that kicked off kind of the health movement. A lot of social programs were saying, hey, basically, hey, we need to build a better fighting force, right?
Yeah.
Just a radical departure from what you would have thought of that generation if you just looked at common knowledge. And then I think what more recently is even more interesting because this is living memory, right?
Yeah.
1918, yeah, there were a handful of folks who are still alive, but it's not really living memory anymore,
No,
right?
not
The
really.
80s and the 90s, like people saw on TV, the chaos in New York and cities going
Yeah.
bankrupt and the crack epidemic, right? Like
Yeah.
that was genuinely a much more dangerous time in America. Crime was
100%.
almost double what it is today.
100%.
I mentioned the video. A lot of folks say, "Hey, okay, well, yeah, but now there's like a lot of creepy people with children." Crimes against children from 1990 to 2007 dropped by 50%, which is amazing. That's an incredible achievement. First off,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but like by all accounts, America is much safer today than we were in the 80s or 90s, and yet people
100%.
gave kids so much more freedom then. What caused this? God, I don't know. I think some of it is maybe like the parents of today grew up in that era. So maybe
Yes.
like they grew up in an era where outdoors was, a fearful, dangerous place. And so when they were kids, it's almost a delay. So like in the 50s and 60s, America was pretty safe, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the kids of the 70s and 80s had parents who grew up in the 50s and 60s. So their
Yeah.
parents were like, yeah, go run and play.
Go
Who
out.
cares?
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
But then as they became teenagers in their 20s and they're consuming news and they're consuming media, they're like, oh, wow, America is really dangerous. And so maybe when they have kids, now it flips back. And
Yeah.
so maybe we're like a one generation lag in terms of fear. Or
Yeah.
maybe it's just broader trends, right? Like I think that there
Yeah.
is like a intense fear of strangers in
Yeah.
America that you
Yeah.
just don't see in other places. Like I think
Yeah.
that there is I was talking about Colombia the other day. Like,
Mhm.
Colombia is, although not always actually, believe it or not, a lot of parts of Colombia are actually safer than a lot of parts of America, which is
Yeah.
crazy. Like, I think like
That's
the
insane to
crime
think
rate in
about. Yeah.
Medellin is like lower than a lot of American cities, which kind of boggles a lot of Americans' minds.
Mhm.
But a lot of places are still, relatively dangerous, right? But
Mhm.
there is somehow like there's not the isolation that occurs in America
Sure.
of this like
Sure.
I need to fear my neighbor. There's an intense fear of home invasions. Like there's a crazy paranoia of home invasions in America. That's the security systems and guns and like
Yeah.
why are folks who are living in these suburbs that are some of the safest places in American history, in
Mhm.
world history. Like if
World
you
history.
live in a wealthy American suburb right now, that is potentially one of the safest places in all of human history,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
like, and yet you are terrified that someone's gonna, break into your house and shoot you in the middle of the
Yeah.
night, right?
Yeah.
There is a fear and a paranoia that is pervasive in America that I think is genuinely at the root of a lot of our issues. I think some
Sure.
of that is due to the media. If it bleeds, it leads, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
it's easy to get folks politically motivated with fear and
Sure.
paranoia and things like that. But it's really an illness. And I think it's like, people complain about kids spending all their time on iPads or watching Twitch streamers or this or that, but it's like the parents are the ones who are doing it. Like I
Yeah.
see it with my own eyes,
Yeah.
like it's so much easier to just give your kid an iPad. Like you let them go outside and you're taking on risk as well as the kid. I think overall risk tolerance has maybe gone down quite a bit in America.
Yeah. Risk tolerance certainly has gone down, and being, sometimes risk can be a good thing, right? Because that's how you learn, and that's how
Exactly.
you grow. I also think it has a lot to do with just lack of community. I feel like when I was
Yeah.
growing up, we just had just generally more community. You knew your neighbors more. Just there was more. We used to have events in which the whole community would come together, and some towns in America still do that, but I feel like that's not as much as it was 20, 30 years ago.
Why do you think that is? Like what do you think has led to this like broad breakdown of community in America?
It's so interesting. Me and my brother were talking about this the other day, and we really can't pinpoint a specific thing. But you know what I think? One thing that I do think has a lot to do with it is back then, 20, 30 years ago, we didn't know what we all thought as much, right? Like you
Oh,
see your
interesting.
neighbors
Yeah.
and stuff, you see people, face-to-face interactions are always going to go better than interactions online, because you're going to have
Oh,
a certain level
interesting.
of
Yeah.
respect and a certain level of, you know, you're gonna filter some of the things that you might want to say. You might be thinking it in your head. You're not gonna just say it to that person in real life, because most people are non-confrontational, right? And people, when you meet somebody in real life, whatever stereotypes or whatever biases you may think about that person, they kind of break down when you actually talk to them and have a conversation and hear about their life and
Yeah.
everything like that. Whereas I think with social media, you just see some random person posting some inflammatory political post, right? And it's like you go on their page and it's like they're with their dog and they're with their family, and it's like this is supposed to be, this is probably in real life, this is a nice person, but for whatever reason, because of the media, because of politics, this person is really angry about a lot of things and they vent that online. They wouldn't have vented that in real life to a stranger or to someone who was their neighbor, unless they got into some type of conversation or something like that. More than likely, they wouldn't have done that. And so I think that now, what your coworker thinks, what your uncle thinks, what your neighbor
Wow.
thinks, in a way that you would not have known 30 years ago, 20 years, even a little over 15 years ago. We wouldn't have really known all that. I mean, MySpace, we didn't put our political opinions on MySpace. We just
Right.
put our
Right.
top
Right.
8 friends and our favorite songs, and that was it. And so now there's like this pervasive nature of putting our most toxic opinions all over our social media, and it just makes it where people kind of just assume everyone hates everybody else. And I don't think everybody does. I think that's just an assumption that we make based off of just how interactions on social media go.
That is so interesting. And the first part of what you said is a theory that I've never really heard articulated before, that really just like, made something in my brain click, which is we used to have less information on what everyone thinks. And it makes me think, how much of that is like, there's a cognitive bias. I forget the name of it, but I think one version of it is like, I think it's age bias, which is
Yeah.
very empirically, well reported, and we all know it too. You think people are closer to your age than you are, right? So if you're
Yes.
30 and you see a 20-year-old, you kind of think they're like in their late 20s. If you're 30 and you see a 40-year-old, you kind of think
Yeah.
they're like 35, right? Like
Yeah.
your perspectives pull people closer and closer to your age. So when you're
Yeah.
60, you think everyone's older, et cetera, right?
Mhm.
And I wonder how much of that plays into this like information, this like dearth of information in the past, where it's like, do you just make these assumptions about your neighbor, and you just make these assumptions that your neighbor believes the same thing that you do? And so even if folks are equally divided and half of them actually genuinely hate the other half, but each half thinks the other half is in their half, right?
Yeah.
And thinks the other half is someplace else, you actually have kind of cohesive social environments, right? Like
Yeah.
you think, oh, well, oh, of course that guy likes Trump because I like Trump. Oh, of course that guy is a Democrat because I'm a Democrat, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And or maybe you just like get smaller drip feeds of their opinions. So for example, you might be like, oh yeah, my aunt, she voted for Trump, and at dinner one time she said that Trump was great, right? Whereas
Mhm.
now I watch her post 5 memes on Facebook every single day for
Yeah.
3 years. I'm like, okay, this is really intense, right?
No, yeah.
I do wonder if like some of those assumptions that folks are more similar to you than they actually are were somehow like social glue and created some kind of social cohesion. That's a
Yeah.
really interesting theory that I haven't heard before. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
And that's interesting to think about it when it comes to like different age groups and things like that, and how you perceive different ages when you're at a certain age. That's really interesting. So before we go, I really want to talk a little bit about your book, um, How to Sound Smart at Parties. Now,
Yeah.
this is the type of book that I 100%. First of all, I am going to buy the book, but this is the type of book that like would have been in my collection as a kid,
Yeah.
because I loved trivia growing up. I love like top 10, those top 10 list books that used to come out. I used to love having stuff like that. I used to always check them out from the library. So tell us a little bit about this book and how it came to be.
Yeah, so this book is called How to Sound Smart at Parties. I think my camera's mirrored. Who cares? And it is basically, I started writing it 2 years ago, or more even, right? So it's been a
Cool.
long journey to get here, and I basically wanted to write a book of fun facts, but something that had like, here's the thing, the issue with fun facts, they lack context, right? That's one
Sure.
of these great things with these
Sure.
longer videos, longer conversations. You can give it context. And so I was like, how do I take these fun facts and contextualize it? How do I explain certain things about like our information ecosystem? And so what I ended up arriving at is essentially creating, it's like, it's all told through a dinner party. So I thought about like, where do I most like to hear fun facts? And it's
Yeah.
almost always at like 2 a.m. with a glass of wine in my hand, hanging out
Sure.
with amazing friends, and just like
Sure.
hearing cool shit, right? And so I
Sure.
wanted to like kind of create that feeling, that ambiance in a book. And so I created like a cast of characters of like weirdos and experts and different people who would talk on different topics. And so, the fun fact comes up, right? But then all the characters kind of discuss the fun fact. It's a dinner party, there's different courses, wine's coming out. It's fun, it's funny, but also it's like you do get this context and this nuance. And so I think the issues of context and nuance is they can be kind of boring at times. But when you insert that into a conversation and folks are laughing and arguing and debating, it becomes really easy to read, really easy to consume. It's also illustrated, by an amazing illustrator. And it's just a really genuinely fun book. You can read it cover to cover because again, it is like a dinner party, or you can just kind of pop through it and grab fun facts and get some background context on it and everything. And yeah, I'm super excited for it. It comes out the 26th. I don't know when this podcast is getting published. It might be out by the time it's out. How to Sound Smart at Parties by Michael McBride. And I'm super stoked on it. It was Cory. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm gonna tell you this right now.
Well, real quick, I do want to talk to you real quick because you made a video about, and this is something very similar to this happened to me, where you did your first draft and you thought you spent like a year on it and you thought it was amazing. Yep. And then tell people a little bit about that.
I spent a full year. So I got the book deal with the publisher. I sent in a writing sample. They liked it. We started the deal. It's with DK Publishing, a subsidiary of Penguin Random House. Super grateful to be working with them. And
love DK Publishing, by the way.
Oh, the best. Yeah. So DK Publishing, for folks who don't know, used to do the Eyewitness History series, like Arms and Armor, Medieval Castles. I was obsessed with those as a kid. Like I literally wore the pages out of those books. I mean, they were just the greatest. And so it feels very full circle to be now making my own book that hopefully folks will, tear apart the pages as well. Yeah. So I spent a full year writing the manuscript and I turned it into them. And they were like, yeah, this isn't exactly what we were looking for. This isn't exactly good enough. And I had to fully start over and rewrite the manuscript. The original manuscript, which I still like the idea, was essentially much more about the information ecosystem. So the characters would just be talking about these facts and you would never know which facts were true or not. And you had to use like context in these conversations to figure out who's a reliable source. Why are they bringing this evidence to the table? Why are they sharing this fun fact? Is it something about their identity, something deeper? Why do they want to believe this misinformation, et cetera? It was just really like nuanced and deep tackling of our information ecosystem and how challenging it can be to actually navigate, right? The original title option was going to be, I read that in a book. This idea being that like, just because you read it in a book doesn't mean it's true. There's a ton of bullshit books out there too, right?
Love that.
Now I turned it in and they're like, yeah, we can't publish a book with like a bunch of false facts. They're like, we can't we can't publish a book where this stuff's not true. Like we're gonna, people are gonna lose their minds. We're gonna get sued. It's like, okay, that's a good point. I see where you're coming from, right? So I think I flew a little too close to the sun. And I do actually think that like what I ended up with is actually a much better book in terms of just broad readability. Like I think this is a much more fun book. I think I probably got a little too heady, a little too intellectual with that first manuscript. I really wanted to do too much and make this like philosophical thing. Whereas while this, I try to still capture some of those elements. Again, there's like, you play with the information ecosystem, you play with context, you play with nuance. It's a fun read. You can rip through it. You can pick it up a couple pages at a time. Hell, you can find the back of your, toilet. It's like, it's a coffee table book. It's really great. I also the first manuscript was also very mature. A lot of cussing, a lot of things like that. For this book, I tried to make it pretty darn PG-13, because I thought, and even lower, like I think there's almost no curse words in it. There's some issues. I do handle some more serious topics. There's one fact about like the invention of LSD, cover a lot of stuff about war and just things like that, but in general, I thought of those like DK Publishing books and me being, these kids tearing it up in the libraries and things like that. And I was like, I want it to be accessible to younger people as well, because those kind of books meant so much to me. But it's definitely not. It is not a kid's book. It's not written for kids. Adults will enjoy it. 10 out of 10. I just kept it a little clean, so like it wouldn't get banned from school libraries,
just in case. 100%. And it's interesting because the first manuscript you mentioned, it's crazy. I had a very similar incident. I was doing some work with the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and they wanted me to do a video talking about the Tuskegee Airmen. And the original script I wrote was a guy at the museum who thinks he's a know-it-all, and he's arguing with the actual guide, and he's throwing out all these like inaccurate facts about the
So
Tuskegee
good.
Airmen. And
That's such a good concept.
yeah, and the guide is like, no, actually wrong. It's actually this, 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 and that was like it was just being correct the whole time. And they said they loved the script, but they had the exact same problem. It was like, well, we
God.
don't want people to think it's misinformation. And I'm like, but the guy's getting corrected in real time, and they were like, yeah, but no. And so like they basically made me rewrite the entire script. And the script that I came up with, it was a very good and factual script,
Yeah.
but I really liked the first one more because it was more comedic, and it was that play of like everybody thinks they know everything when they go to these museums, and then they actually learn the real story, and it can kind of conflict with, and similar to that concept, like, oh, I heard this on TV, or I read this in a book, and it's like, no, but actually here's the actual real knowledge. And it was kind of like a way you can correct misinformation in real time. Like that was kind of the theme that I was going with. But yeah, just like with your book, they were like, yeah, no, we don't want to be responsible for putting any misinformation out there, even if it is getting corrected. We still don't. Somebody might just watch one part of the video and scroll, and they're like,
Right.
they only got that one incorrect fact from it. So I got where they were coming from, just like with you. But still, I thought it was a good idea.
I love that idea, by the way. I'm also curious, like, do you, um, like, I always find it to be a fine line between like how smart do you assume the audience to be?
Sure,
And I think
sure,
that like sometimes we don't give the audience enough credit.
sure.
I think, as much as we talk about like, oh, there's the marvelization of America and everyone wants a moral thing and this and that, I think sometimes those voices are the loudest.
Yeah.
And they kind of drown out folks who can't appreciate nuance, can't appreciate context. And I do think there's a lot of them. I thought, Cleo Abram, the creator, she had a great quote that I thought was really good. She said something along the lines of, I always assume the audience to be intelligent, but lacking in background context.
Yes, that's
So
a good way to think about it.
she's like, I approach topics thinking audiences are smart and intelligent and capable, but that they know nothing about the topic. So I provide a lot of background info,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't dumb it down too much
Yeah.
because I assume the audience is smart. And I like that, and that's kind of the way I look at it too.
Sure.
But that being said, there were other issues with the first manuscript too, and so I think like the rewrite also forces just be better writing, cleaner
Yes.
writing,
Yes.
funnier, snappier, and I think that the misinformation obviously the publisher pushed back against, but ended up being a huge benefit because also just like I tried to get so intellectual and so philosophical. I just made it a worse book, right? It was just less fun, less funny, less interesting, and it's like you can never compromise on interestingness. I feel that very strongly
Sure.
in our profession,
Sure.
right? Like we are not academics, and
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
given here's like kind of like the idea suit manifesto in my eyes, right? And I feel like you are a leading person in this kind of movement as well, which is when people have to choose between two pieces of content, when people have to choose between two pieces of media, two facts, they will almost always choose the one that is more entertaining, that is more
Yes.
interesting, that is more
Yes.
funny, that gives more dopamine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the kind of idea suit manifesto is that it is our responsibility to make the truth the most entertaining thing possible.
There
We
you
need to
go.
make the truth more entertaining than the lies. I think in the long run, I genuinely think that's the only way we beat back the rising tide of misinformation and sort of global stupidity, right? Like it has to be, we can't tell people to eat their vitamins all the time. We can't tell people to eat their vegetables all the time, right? We need to be the gummy multivitamin that tastes delicious, right? And that's because I just think that's a much more realistic way of looking at the world. And so this
Sure.
book is like a prime example of that. Of I think even people who don't like reading are going to like the book because it's so fun and so light and so easy to read. It's also just the best fun facts I've ever collected after almost 7 years of collecting fun facts. Really are the absolute best. Most of these I've never made videos on. I wanted to create a lot of original content,
Yeah.
and then just some of the top highlights. It is the absolute best facts, and so I'm really proud of this book. I'm really proud of this book. I really am.
Well, Michael, that's really great. I'm really proud of you. Like I said, we've been working together and talking for years now, and it's wonderful that you got to make this book. How to Sound Smart at Parties goes on sale November 26th.
November 26th. Yeah,
And
you can pre-order it now.
Pre-order it, check it out. Great for coffee tables, great for dinner parties. It sounds like a wonderful book.
It's also a great gift. I always say like one of the reasons we wanted to release it during the holidays is I was like, I have a theory which is like very few people buy themselves a fun facts book. It's like something you always receive as a gift, and so it's a perfect gift for like it's $25, and it might even be discounted at some point in time. So it's like but I don't know, I have no control over that. But it's like it's $25. And it's like, I feel like it's a perfect gift for like your nephew or niece you don't know, or your
Yeah.
cousin. Like, it's like
Yeah.
such a nice gift. It's not, you don't need to know their size. You don't need to ask
Yeah.
their
There you
their
go.
pant size,
There you
Yeah.
go. That's
But yeah,
awesome.
man, Corey, it's been awesome chatting, man. I could chat to you for hours. I really love your perspective on things. I really find you to be one of the most lucid voices on social media right now. I think your content is always a breath of fresh air. And yeah, I love what you do, and I love how your brain works. And I'm happy to talk to you anytime, man. It's been great.
Awesome, Mike. Well, the feeling is mutual. I really appreciate you coming on the show, man. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Corey. Have a good one.